Fellas, other than Duke, who from the Atlantic Coast Conference is going to take a step forward here in the 24-25 season? The ACC truly only has right now one elite basketball team. They live at Cameron Indoor Stadium, and two others with NCAA-worthy resumes, Clemson and Louisville. Then there are four teams on the bubble. Why has Duke and Clemson and Louisville been able to rise up, and who from that other group could lift their performance skyward and make it to the field of 68? Coach Kerry Keating, we'll start out with you.
Well, those you mentioned have just been able to put it bluntly, win. I mean, when you kind of look at what numbers have started added up to right now, and this is what happens when you get to mid-January. We talked about this in the past. I remember being on staffs where you kind of want to resist the temptation to kind of see what's coming because it's so euphoric and it kind of gives you that little boost of dopamine, but it doesn't help you win games. And quad one is going to be talked about ad nauseum when we start talking about bubble teams and bracketologists, and certainly get to February into March. Just for everyone out there, quad one is when you beat a team at home that's ranked 1 through 30, when you beat a team on the road that's ranked 1 through 50. I'm sorry, beat a neutral team 1 through 50 on a neutral court, or beat a team on the road ranked 1 through 75. Now, fortunately for the ACC, they still have these four middling teams lingering in the top 75: Pitt, Carolina, SMU, and Wake. The problem is they all need to win. So now you're eating yourself. You're at, those are the last four teams in that road quad one ability. And yes, did it help Duke to beat another quad one road win at Wake? Yes. As David mentioned, it wasn't as bad a loss because Duke is one of the top three, if not top two teams in the country right now. But Pitt, Carolina, SMU, Wake combined in quad one games, 3-22. You don't need to really look any further than who have you played and who have you beaten. This is kind of always the fascination that I have with what the makeup of the committee was and what comes out of the mouth of the commissioner of the committee as soon as those last four in, next four out, and everyone has the numbers that are available right now. It's so hard to hide, as it was in the past, who those next 8 teams were. I fear that there may be 1, 2, or even 3 teams right on that precipice of being either last in, playing first in, or maybe first out, because they're going to start beating each other, and they're going to beat each other in the wrong way, if you will. There's no right or wrong way. So really, it's all going to come down to which out of those four can just shut all of that out, not worry about who they're playing. If it's quad 1, 2, or 3, realize that's who we have in the ACC. No one, to my knowledge, has any in-conference, non-conference games. Of course, you can't now because there's 20 dates on the schedule now in 2.5 months. Whoever can emerge out of those four with wins, and this is why the SMU win at State was so important, because you can't afford, if you're one of those four teams, to lose games outside of that group of four, albeit below that group of four, because now they become quad 2 and 3 losses. You have to make sure you take care of quad 2 and 3 wins, which there are too many of in the ACC, historically speaking, comparatively speaking, I should say, to the past. You have to win games. Pitt, Carolina, SMU, Wake, we're hoping that we can get 2, maybe 3 out of there. I just think the way that it's looking right now, whoever's going to start playing better basketball is going to start to really emerge and win those games. I still like what I see out of Wake, obviously having the win last week. As David mentioned, because of their defensive prowess, defense will travel. Defense can help you win on the road. We talked about this in the past. Matt Woodley's background with Tony Bennett and their defensive installation at Wake Forest, mixing in a little bit of zone when they need to. That has helped them stay in games and almost gave them a chance to beat Duke and pull off the big sweep with Carolina and Duke in 1 week. I like where Wake stands out of that. Carolina at 1-7, I think, is really indicting of where they're at right now. I think if you look no further than that. If Carolina was 7-1 instead of 1-7 against quad one, I'm sure half the stuff we're talking about would not even be in the conversation as much as, oh my goodness, Hubert's doing a great job with 2 freshman lottery picks and a 5th-year guard and a plethora of bigs by committee. It could be a completely different conversation. The proof is in the pudding, and in this pudding, it's in quad one right now, where 3-22 is just not going to cut it. So whoever can take a step in these next 2 weeks and not lose any games they're quote unquote supposed to win, I think will put themselves in a way better position, obviously speaking. How they go about that is all different for each team. But in terms of Wake and Carolina, I mentioned those 2 4-minute stretches. Carolina had a 4-minute stretch in the Wake Forest game from about 9 minutes to 4 minutes, where if you're watching how they play and how they've played, they actually ran offense. They actually set back screens for Washington to move to the basket. They scored on almost every possession, had a chance to score. It looked better. It just looked like they were cohesive. And then for some odd reason, it was just gone, just like that, right? And then the 4 minutes that we talked about in the Wake Forest game, there were 3 possessions of zone in particular. Duke played zone for a total of 4 minutes. I don't know what the amount of possession was, 3, 4, 5. But you look at the 3 possessions, and Wake had a lead at this time. John kind of played some psychological ops right here and said, you know what? We never play zone. We're man-to-man till we die, but we're not going to die today. Let's just throw a zone out. We got all these long guys. And when you watch these clips, there's just 5 long guys standing around. It wasn't like Syracuse had a plan for their zone. It wasn't like West Virginia and John Beilein played this 1-3-1 that did certain things in the zone. This was just like, we're not going to play man-to-man. We're going to stand around. And exactly what they wanted to happen happened. Wake ended up in the first possession not even realizing it until the end of the possession and jacked up a 3. It took them a kind of a little bit of an adjustment in the next possession until they finally set a ball screen and then had a flash from Juke Harris into the high post. That got a pretty decent high post look, and that's where the soft spot in almost any zone that's traditional, 2-3-3-2 is going to be, in the high post in the middle. They never really attacked the middle until almost 3 possessions later, got 1 shot at it. But by the time that they had figured out that Duke was in zone, Duke came out of the zone because they lost the lead. Those 4 minutes, and I think we're going to see this happen a lot. I'm going to really be paying attention, especially to our local teams here. These 4-minute stretches, I feel like, in all these games that are getting close. And by the way, speaking of close, I am now voting to change the nickname of North Carolina State to Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. Wolfpack ain't cutting it. They are losing. They've lost all these last 4 games by 2 possessions or less. They are the kings of close. Horseshoes and hand grenades, but on the wrong side. But all these close games, and they will start getting closer and more tight and a little bit more exciting to watch, hopefully, for the fans, are going to come down to these 4-minute stretches. Maybe not the last 4 minutes, but I'm going to be really paying attention as to which 4 minutes we can pull out of these head-to-head matchups that, from a coaching perspective, really make a difference in what will be the end of the season and who's in the tournament and who's not.
Yeah, Mike, since this is the first year of the ACC as an 18-school league, I'm going to break the league into 3 compartments. One is that top 3 that we're talking about with Duke and Louisville and Clemson. I'm not suggesting that the Cardinals and the Tigers are as good as the Blue Devils, but they're the 3 that if the season ended today, they would know they would be in the NCAA tournament, given the resume they have built so far. So 3 at the top. I'm just going to chop the bottom half of the ACC entirely. The bottom 9 teams in the standings have 0 chance of making the NCAA tournament. 0. And I'm going to talk about the other 6 in between briefly. Pittsburgh, North Carolina, Wake Forest, SMU, and I'll just throw Stanford and Florida State in there for fun because they've shown enough and their record is good enough as we speak. Stanford 14-6. They have a couple of quad 1 wins. Florida State is 13-7. Out of those middle 6, I'll call them, I think the teams with the best chance are Pitt, North Carolina, and Wake Forest. And if there's time later, I'll elaborate on why I like the Panthers, the Tar Heels, and the Demon Deacons. Not necessarily in that order, but those 3 more than I like SMU or Stanford or Florida State to emerge as something more than a bubble team. But I want to briefly talk about the top 3 teams because as much as we all agree, and it's been a theme on our show, that player agents are a different thing in college basketball, and name, image, likeness is relatively new, and the NCAA portal is relatively new, and transfers being almost universally immediately eligible at their new school rather than the old sit-out year, that's relatively new to major college athletics. And we're all trying to discern, the right way to proceed here in 2025 and moving forward. I want to outline that the 3 top teams, Duke, Louisville, and Clemson, have taken 3 different roads. I mean, there's not a lot of similarities among the 3. John Shire at Duke has the ability to sign highly ranked high school recruiting classes almost every year. There is only a handful of programs in the entire country that could use that blueprint as their way to get to the top of the mountain. So picture the top of the mountain. Let's just envision multiple roads to the top of the mountain. There's not just one road. There's several different paths. Duke has a path that most others would not be able to succeed with if they attempted it. Duke's motto is basically keep signing like in the old days, prep All-Americans, Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, Common Malawach, etc. They're three of the best players on the team. And then John Shire obviously at some point pivoted to realizing he needed some older dudes who were good at their previous school but willing to be secondary players at Duke, like the Mason Gillis who hit the huge three at Wake Forest, like Malik Brown, who when healthy is just an elite defender, the Syracuse transfer. Three of their top, 8 are really good major college transfers. So that's the blend that works for Duke. But it starts with the way Coach K did it, starting in the mid-1980s. We're going to sign more prep All-Americans than almost everybody else. We're going to churn out more NBA players than almost everybody else. That way it can still work, but it's going to work at Duke and only a handful of other schools. Louisville and Clemson are not doing it that way at all. In fact, the Cardinals and the Tigers aren't even doing it similarly to each other. Brad Brownell has his way at Clemson, and the first-year head coach Pat Kelsey has his way at Louisville. And one way that it's different, Clemson, for example, I think is a brilliant approach to modern-day college basketball. If you look at Brad Brownell's starting lineup, it is a blend of guys that have been with Brad Brownell a long time, know his way, know his offense, know his defense, etc. And I'm speaking about guys like Chase Hunter at guard, a guy like Ian Shefflin. I think both of those guys are going to be on the 15-man All-ACC team. Hunter's in his 6th year with the Tigers. Ian Shefflin's in his 4th year with the Tigers. So that's the old way, right? I got this great guard. I got this great big man. I'm a good coach, Brad Brownell. And those are my foundational pieces. But he didn't rest on his returning players. He went out and got Jaden Zachary from Boston College, a guard who had started for 3 years with the Eagles. He went out and got a big man. He's almost a 7-footer, Victor Locken. He was a 2-year starter for the Cincinnati Bearcats. That's not a bench player. That's not a low major school. That's a 2-year starter for the Cincinnati Bearcats that you just plug in as your starting center next to, he's a poor man's Cooper Flagg. If you look at Ian Shefflin's numbers, he is a little point forward-ish for the Tigers. Just obviously not as well-known or celebrated or as talented, of course, as Cooper Flagg. But there's your blend. Guys that have learned my way for 4, 5, or 6 years. Chauncey Wiggins is another veteran Tiger in the starting lineup. And then you got these impact transfers both in the starting lineup and on the bench. Jake Hydebreeder is this three-point specialist who was all Mountain West Conference at Air Force. And Brad Brownell saw his greatest skill was hitting threes, saw that as a need in his rotation, plugged him in, and now he's a valuable bench player. But that's the Clemson way, a very different blend than the Duke way. Finally, at Louisville, Pat Kelsey, remember, is taking over a program that lost all 13 scholarship players from last year. What did he do? And this is not easy to do. He went out and got high-profile, proven players from all over Division I. I mean, Terrence Edwards Jr. was the Sun Belt Player of the Year at James Madison. Javon Hadley was a multi-year starter for the Colorado Buffaloes. Those guys are in their, I think they're both in their 5th year of major college basketball. This guy's hurt right now, but they got a guy named Kaysen Pryor from South Florida. He had been a JUCO star, good player for South Florida, really versatile big man. Again, hurt right now, but another really big-time signee for Pat Kelsey when he took over at Louisville and had to truly build that program from scratch, essentially. We've talked about Chucky Hepburn in the past. 3-year starter at Wisconsin. To me, he's going to be a first-team All-ACC player. He went out and got a guy who was a proven, reliable player for the Wisconsin Badgers, and Pat Kelsey saw something that was a good fit for his system, and now not only do you have a proven, veteran, experienced, polished, calm under pressure point guard, but he's actually playing the best basketball of his entire college career. He's a better player than he was as a 3-year starter for the Badgers. You got to give a coaching staff a lot of credit for taking a guy who was a good player at his old school for 3 years and turning him into a first-team All-ACC player at this school. That list goes on, and it actually includes Pat Kelsey brought 3 guys with him from the College of Charleston. I mean, Coach Keating will tell you, there's no basketball player you know better than the guy who just lined up for you for the last year or 2 or 3. And so he takes the Louisville job. One of the 3 guys from Charleston is redshirting this year. But the other 2 we've seen, Rain Smith is maybe the best three-point shooter in this league. He wasn't some unknown. He was an all-CAA player for the College of Charleston, Pat Kelsey's old school. And he comes off the bench sometimes for the Cardinals, but he's about as valuable a sixth man when he doesn't start as there is in the entire ACC. They also brought the big guy. His name's James Scott, 6'11". He was on the Coastal Athletic Association's all-freshman team as a member of the College of Charleston. Again, Pat Kelsey's old school. You're guessing less when you're bringing your own guys with you. But he didn't just bring those guys. Obviously, Sun Belt Player of the Year, Terrence Edwards, multi-year starter at Colorado, Javon Hadley, Chucky Hepburn, 3-year starter in the Big Ten. It's hard to envision how the pieces are going to fit together. It's not merely collecting talent. Pat Kelsey did as good a job as anybody of accurately envisioning how puzzle pieces will fit together. Maybe he'd say he got a little lucky along the way. You're never 100% sure how your puzzle pieces will fit, especially when they're coming from all over the nation. But along with John Shire of Duke, I think Pat Kelsey and Brad Brownell have done brilliant coaching jobs. And when I see those National Coach of the Year discussions, I think all 3 of those guys deserve to be somewhere in the mix.